What do you think the message was from Jackson Hole? Because it seems like central bankers were more or less divided on the impact of international developments on the Fed's timetable.
Seema, I think you got that exactly right. The Federal Reserve is concerned with what's going on in international markets. And the reason for that is that China is the second largest economy in the world, as you heard from Fisher. And to the extent that China has an influence on other countries, pretty soon you start getting that critical mass. My suspicion is that the Federal Reserve does want to move in September. But on the other hand, if you see any sort of significant turbulence either in the Chinese equity markets or even in the U.S. equity markets, they can easily pause until December. One of the things that I think Fisher made very clear was that they do intend and have a real energy for raising interest rates this year. But September is still a little bit of a toss-up, and I would put the odds at less than 50% for September.
Yeah, I mean, the inflation picture looks extremely bleak, Anthony. The core personal consumption expenditure index, which is widely watched by the Fed, has only risen by 1.6% over the past year, indicating that perhaps this 2% target that the central bank has in place it's too aggressive.
Well, remember that monetary policy, as Milton Friedman, the gentleman that won a Nobel Prize, has told us, has long and variable lags. So you got to be very careful, because if you look at inflation today and you try to execute monetary policy based on today's inflation rate, you're going to make a mistake. And I think Fisher made that very clear. So one of the things the Federal Reserve wants to do is to anticipate where the economy is going, where inflation is going, and not necessarily look at where we are now, because that's sort of looking at the rear view mirror to make monetary policy today. So you're absolutely right. Inflation is below the target. But again, Fisher made it very clear that he's pretty positive and pretty optimistic that inflation is going to move up to the target. So I think that will dictate where the Federal Reserve moves from here and the timing.
Anthony, last week we saw lots of volatility, not just in equity markets, in the bond market too, the US 10-year yield dipping below 2%. Does that suggest that this is something more than just an equity market correction, that there's some fundamental weakness to come around the corner in the US economy?
Well, I think that there are some risks, because when you see a lot of turbulence, you run the risk that some of that turbulence and some of the softness in equity markets starts to go into the fundamentals. And by that I mean that perhaps consumer confidence may start to slip, and that may have an influence on consumer spending. You saw the University of Michigan in the United States consumer confidence index slipping a little bit in the latest month. I think it's too early, because retail sales are pretty strong. You saw consumer spending in the second quarter coming in at a towering strength. So it's too early to say that, but that's one of the things that they're looking at. They want to look at turbulence to the extent that it influences the fundamentals. They have to be careful.